Good morning, esteemed panelists. My group mates, Mr. Bernas, Ms. Pastor, and I are pleased to present our thesis entitled The Effect of Parachute Towing on Sprinting Speed Among Male Football Players. Football is a fast-paced sport that requires players to accelerate and respond quickly during offensive and defensive situations. Previous studies, such as those by Haugen et al. 2019 and Martinopoulou et al. 2011, showed that sprint-specific and parachute-resisted training can improve sprint performance and force production. According to Salerno et al. 2023, while the effects of parachute resistance on running kinematics and kinetics have been studied, the impact of parachute towing combined with a structured training protocol remains unexplored. Therefore, this study aimed to determine whether adding a 4-week parachute towing program to regular football training could significantly improve sprinting speed.
The study was conducted at the Iloilo Sports Complex from April 7, 2026 to May 1, 2026. The facilities serve as a training and a testing venue for all pre-test and post-test assessments, as well as the implementation of the 4-week intervention program involving regular football training and parachute-resisted sprint training. A total of 20 adolescent male football players were initially considered for the study. However, only 14 met the inclusion criteria and were ultimately included in the final sample. The participants were aged 14 to 16 years old and were from Central Philippine University. They were selected through purposive sampling based on the inclusion and exclusion criteria established by the researchers. A registered nurse conducted health screenings to ensure that participants were medically fit and free from musculoskeletal, neurological, or cardiopulmonary conditions that could affect performance or safety during training. After the screening process and obtaining informed consent, the 14 eligible participants were randomly allocated into 2 groups using the fishbowl method. The control group underwent regular football training only, while the experimental group underwent football training adjunct with parachute-resisted sprint training. Table 1 shows the mean demographic profile of the participants in terms of age, height, and weight, indicating that both the control and experimental groups had comparable characteristics. Table 2 shows the mean sprinting speed of the 2 groups during the pre-test and the post-test. Both groups showed an increase in sprinting speed during the post-test done after the 4-week intervention. Additionally, the assumption of homogeneity of variances was satisfied for pre-test. Table 3 shows that there was significant difference in the pre-test and post-test sprinting speed of the both groups. This suggests that participants' sprinting speed improved regardless of what group they belong to. Table 4 shows that both groups improved their sprinting speed after the training period. The control group and experimental group were also different overall in terms of sprinting performance. However, the improvement of the experimental group was not significantly greater than the control group, meaning both groups improved at almost the same rate over time.
Both groups showed significant improvement in sprinting speed after the 4-week intervention. The experimental group demonstrated better overall sprint performance, suggesting that parachute-resisted sprint training may provide additional benefits in acceleration, force production, and sprint mechanics. However, the time intervention effect was not significant, indicating that both groups improved similarly over time. The findings of this study are consistent with previous research showing that sprint-specific and resisted sprint training improves sprint performance, acceleration, lower limb power, and stride mechanics among athletes. Studies by Yudov et al. 2021, Cahill et al. 2020, Hassan et al. 2021, Martinopoulou et al. 2011, and Salerno et al. 2023 support the effectiveness of parachute-resisted sprint training in enhancing sprint speed and force production. Other studies also reported improvements in neuromuscular coordination, motor neuron activation, and acceleration mechanics following sprint training interventions. However, the non-significant interaction effect in this study may be attributed to the short 4-week intervention period, small sample size, and individual differences in training adaptation and fitness levels.
Now for the conclusion. Parachute-resisted sprint training was found to be effective in improving sprint speed among adolescent football players. This improvement may be due to velocity-dependent resistance of the parachute, which increases lower extremity muscle recruitment, acceleration ability, and sprint mechanics. Previous studies by Salerno et al. And Martinopolo et al. Also reported improvements in sprint performance following parachute-resisted sprint training. Both groups demonstrated significant speed improvements. Although the experimental group generally performed better, the improvement rate between groups was not statistically different. Both groups were exposed to sprint-oriented football drills and conditioning activities, which may have enhanced neuromuscular coordination and lower limb force production over time. Yutov et al. Explained that sprint-specific training alone can already improve sprint performance among young athletes. The findings also support the law of specificity and the overload principle. The parachute added resistance directly during sprinting movements, allowing participants to adapt to sport-specific demands while progressively overloading the muscles involved in sprinting. This supports the concept that training adaptations occur when exercise mimic the actual sport activity and gradually increase physical demand. Lastly, physical therapists may incorporate parachute-resisted sprint training as a safe and evidence-based conditioning strategy to improve sprint mechanics, acceleration, and overall athletic performance among football players and other athletes.
Several limitations were included in the study: small sample size, short intervention duration, environmental factors, wind resistance and direction, and individual differences in motivation and fatigue.
To further improve future studies related to this topic, the researchers recommend the following. First, conducting studies with larger sample sizes may provide more reliable and generalizable results and may detect stronger differences between the control group and experimental groups. A longer intervention period may allow participants to develop greater neuromuscular adaptations and produce more noticeable improvements in sprinting speed. Researchers should control wind direction and resistance by conducting the training under similar weather conditions, since this may affect parachute drag and sprint performance, which can affect the accuracy of the results. Furthermore, providing each participant with their own parachute using a 1-to-1 ratio may reduce waiting time, improve training consistency, and allow smoother implementation of the intervention. Lastly, the study showed that the parachute-resisted sprint training can help improve sprinting speed and may serve as an effective supplementary condition method for football players.
Thank you for listening to our presentation, and now we are open for questions.